The ranch sat where the land seemed to give up on trying to be beautiful. No trees tall enough to cast shade, no river loud enough to sing. Just wind, dust, and a sky so wide it made a man feel small if he let it. Elias Crow did not let it. He had lived on that stretch of scorched earth for so long that the land had learned his shape, the way his boots pressed into the soil, the way his shadow moved slow at sunrise and slower at dusk. He woke before the sun, slept after it died, and spoke to no one because there was no one left to speak to. He hadn't seen a woman in decades, not since the town dried up, not since the road stopped pretending it led somewhere, not since the last echoes of laughter vanished like a rumor the desert swallowed whole. Time had not passed for Elias in years or in months. It passed in fences repaired, in cattle counted, in storms survived. It passed in scars. It passed in silence. People once said he chose this life, that he pushed the world away, but that wasn't true. The world had simply stopped knocking. On the morning everything changed. Elias was fixing a gatepost that had finally surrendered to rot. His hands were thick, cracked, permanently stained by iron and earth. The hammer rose and fell in a rhythm older than thought. Then the rhythm broke. At first he thought it was the wind shifting, then the cattle grew restless, then the ground itself seemed to hum, a low vibration that traveled up his legs and settled in his chest. Elias straightened slowly, one hand resting on the post as if the land itself might tip without him. 6 figures stood at the edge of his property line. They hadn't been there a moment before. He would have noticed. He always noticed. They were women, 6 of them, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with softness or decoration. Their beauty was sharp, deliberate, carved by hardship and purpose. Dust clung to their clothes. Sun marked their skin. Their eyes held something Elias hadn't seen in a human face in longer than he could remember. Certainty. They walked toward him without speaking. Every instinct in Elias's body screamed danger. His hand moved not to a weapon, but to the old scar at his side, a habit from a life when men still came looking for him, when names still mattered, when his own name was whispered with fear instead of forgotten entirely. The women stopped 10 paces away. Then, without a word, they knelt. 6 knees hit the dirt of his ranch as one. The sound wasn't loud, but it shook him harder than thunder ever had. Elias felt the past rise up inside him like a storm surge. Memories he had buried deep, faces, screams, firelight, blood soaking into soil not unlike this one. He had sworn never to kneel again. He had sworn never to let anyone kneel to him. What is this? His voice came out rough, unused, like a gate forced open after years of rust. None of them answered right away. The woman in the center lifted her head first. Her hair was dark, braided tight, threaded with grey that spoke of years earned the hard way. Her eyes met his, and Elias felt something dangerous crack open inside his chest. "We finally found you," she said. Those 4 words carried the weight of a lifetime. Elias laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You're lost." "No," she replied calmly. "We were." The wind moved through them, tugging at coats and loose strands of hair. Elias noticed then that each of them carried something different at her side. Not weapons exactly, but tools. A coil of rope, a worn book, a medallion. A satchel stitched and restitched. Objects carried for reasons deeper than survival. "You don't know me," Elias said. The woman shook her head. "We know exactly who you are." That was when he felt it. The old fear. The one he thought had died. Not fear of death. Fear of being remembered. They did not rise until he told them to. And when they did, it was not with relief, but with resolve. They followed him back to the ranch house, a structure held together by stubbornness and memory. Inside, the air smelled of coffee grounds and old wood. Elias poured water, then thought better of it, and poured coffee instead, hands steady despite the storm inside him. They sat. He stood. The woman with the braid spoke again. "My name is Mara." He did not offer his. She didn't need it. "You vanished," she continued, "after the valley burned. After the men who hunted you stopped coming back." Elias closed his eyes. "So the stories are still alive," he muttered. "They kept us alive," another woman said, her voice low and fierce, "when no one else would." That was when Elias understood. These women weren't strangers, they were consequences. They told him everything then, how each of them had lost something to the same darkness he once fought alone, how his name had become a warning passed in whispers, how they had searched for him not to beg, not to praise, but to kneel in acknowledgement of a debt the world never paid. "We don't want your land," Mara said softly. "We want your truth." Outside, the sun climbed higher, illuminating the ranch like a stage finally lit after years of darkness. Elias Crow had spent decades erasing himself, and now 6 women had come to write him back into history. This was only the beginning. The night came down hard on the ranch, sudden and heavy, as if the sky itself wanted to smother what had been spoken inside the house. Elias Crow sat alone at the table long after the women had been shown the old bunkhouse. The lamp flickered, casting shadows that stretched and twisted across the walls like memories refusing to stay still. He hadn't invited anyone to stay the night in over 30 years, yet here they were, 6 women sleeping under his roof, carrying his name like a loaded gun. He poured himself another cup of coffee he didn't need and didn't want. Sleep was impossible. It always was when the past stirred. Their words replayed in his head. The valley burned. The men who hunted you never came back. Elias rose slowly and stepped outside. The stars were sharp tonight, too many of them, watching. He remembered nights just like this one, waiting, listening, counting breaths between heartbeats while death moves somewhere beyond the dark. Back then, he wasn't alone. Back then, he was feared. A soft footstep crunched behind him. Mara stopped a few paces away, respectful but unafraid. That alone told him more than her words ever could. "You don't sleep much," she said. "Never learned how," Elias replied. She folded her arms against the cold. "Neither did we. Not after what happened." Elias stared out at the open land. "You should leave at first light." Mara didn't argue. She didn't plead. She only said, "They know you're alive." That sentence landed heavier than any threat. "Who?" he asked, though he already knew. "The men who survived," she said. "And the sons of the ones who didn't." Elias felt the old rage stir, slow and dangerous. He had spent decades believing the world forgot him. He had been wrong. The world had been waiting. At dawn, the women gathered outside the house. The sun revealed them more clearly now, each marked by loss in a different way. One walked with a limp, another bore scars along her forearm, deliberate and ritualistic. One had eyes too old for her face. These weren't wanderers, they were forged. Elias saddled his horse for the first time in years with purpose instead of habit. "You're not riding with us," he said. "We already did," said the youngest among them, her voice steer. "Die. For years, in stories, in warnings." They moved through the land like people who understood what it meant to survive it. As they rode, the past began to spill out, not as confession, but as necessity. Mara spoke of the valley Elias once protected, a place where families lived because someone finally stood between them and the men who took what they wanted. Elias had been that someone. Not a hero, a barrier. He remembered the first time blood soaked that valley soil, how his hands shook afterward, how the shaking stopped the second time, how by the 10th he no longer counted. "You didn't just kill them," Mara said quietly. "You broke them, you made them afraid to come back. And they never forgive fear," Elias said. They reached a ridge overlooking the ruins of what had once been a town. Charred beams jutted from the earth like bones. Elias dismounted, his chest tight. "I left because staying would have meant killing everyone who came looking," he said, including boys who didn't yet know what kind of men they'd become. One of the women stepped forward. "They became those men anyway." Silence followed. That was when the first shot rang out. The bullet struck dirt near Elias's boot, close enough to remind him how easily he could still die. He didn't flinch. Riders crested the far hill, armed, organized, confident, too confident. Mara's hand tightened around the medallion at her neck. "They followed us." Elias smiled then, but there was no warmth in it. "Good," he said. "I was tired of waiting." The fight was brutal and fast. Elias moved like a man who had never stopped being hunted. Every motion was efficient, merciless. The women fought too, not as followers, but as equals. This wasn't a rescue. This was a reckoning. When it was over, the dust settled around bodies that would never rise again. Elias stood among them, breathing hard, blood on his hands. Some his, Mo. "Stir not, you see now," he said to Mara. "This is what you brought back into your lives." She met his gaze without fear. No, this is what finally ended. In the distance, more riders could be seen. This wasn't finished, not even close. Elias looked at the women, at what they had survived, what they were willing to face. For the first time in decades, he didn't feel alone. The war he ran from had found him again, and this time he wouldn't face it in silence. The night before the last stand was unnaturally quiet. No wind, no insects. Even the cattle stood still, as if the land itself understood what was coming and chose to hold its breath. Elias Crow sat on the porch of his ranch, with a rifle resting across his knees, staring into the darkness where the horizon vanished. Firelight flickered behind him, casting his shadow long and broken across the dirt. For the first time in decades, that shadow was not alone. The 6 women sat nearby, cleaning weapons, tightening straps, checking each other's wounds with the calm precision of people who had already accepted the worst. No one spoke much. Words had grown unnecessary. Truth had already been stripped bare. Mara finally broke the silence. Tomorrow, they won't stop coming. Elias nodded. They never planned to. She studied him, really studied him, as if memorizing the lines of his face. You could still leave. He almost laughed. Almost. I left once. That's how all this survived long enough to find me again. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a folded piece of cloth, old and worn thin. She handed it to him. Elias recognized it instantly. A child's scarf, burned at the edges, stained dark in places no washing could ever clean. His hands trembled as he took it. You saved my sister, Mara said quietly. You carried her out of the fire. You gave her this to keep warm. She died 2 days later anyway, but not alone. Not afraid. Elias swallowed hard. He had carried so many that night. Faces blurred together over time. But this he remembered. She was the reason, he said hoarsely. The moment I stopped pretending I could walk away clean. The women gathered closer now, drawn by the gravity of the truth. Each of them shared their piece. One had been a child hidden beneath floorboards, while Elias stood in a doorway and refused to move. Another had watched her father live because Elias killed the man who came to finish the job. Another had lost everything, but survived because fear finally had a name. They hadn't at Knelt because he was powerful. They had knelt because he chose to stay when everyone else ran. Dawn arrived without ceremony. The riders came with the sun at their backs, dozens of them this time, spreading wide, confident in numbers. They carried new weapons, fresh horses, and old hatred passed down like inheritance. At their center rode a man with Elias's eyes and none of his restraint. "Crow!" the man shouted. "Come out and die like the monster you are!" Elias stepped forward alone. "I already died," he called back. "You're just late." The first wave hit hard. Gunfire tore through the air. Wood splintered. Dirt exploded. The ranch, his sanctuary, his prison, became a battlefield. Elias moved with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. Every shot counted. Every step mattered. The women fought beside him, covering angles, dragging the wounded, standing their ground without hesitation. One by one, the attackers fell. But numbers have a way of grinding even legends down. Elias took a bullet to the shoulder. Then another grazed his ribs. Pain flared bright and honest. He welcomed it. Pain meant he was still choosing. When the man with his eyes finally dismounted, it was among bodies and smoke. "You ruined us," the man snarled. Elias met him halfway. "I stopped you. They fought." Hand to hand, brutal and personal. Fists, knives, breath against breath. Elias felt his strength slipping, age finally collecting its due. The man raised his weapon for the final blow, and Mara fired. The shot echoed across the land like a verdict. The man fell. Silence followed, thick and complete. Elias sank to his knees, blood soaking into the dirt he had guarded for a lifetime. The women surrounded him, panic breaking through their composure at last. "It's done," he whispered. "Don't waste this." Mara held his face, tears cutting clean lines through the dust on her cheeks. "You don't get to decide that alone." Elias smiled faintly. "I already did. A long time ago." As the sun climbed higher, Elias Crow died on his land. Not forgotten, not feared, but finally known. Weeks later, the ranch stood quieter, but not empty. The women stayed. They rebuilt. They turned the place into something new. Not a fortress, not a grave, but a refuge. Travelers came again. Stories spread, not of a monster, but of a man who stood when it mattered. Sometimes at dusk, Mara swore she could still see his shadow stretching across the dirt, steady and unyielding. And somewhere in the wide, endless sky, the silence finally rested,